Hello, everybody, and welcome back to, I guess, not World of Warships Legends for a change, but it's on the same context as World of Warships Legends. So, yesterday I released a video in the Bismarck, and during which I said something to the effect of, I think at some level, you have to at least give some respect to everybody that was on either side of the wars, because most of the time, most of the people that were involved in the wars were not doing it of their own volition. They were forced to go, right? They didn't have a choice. Their governments forced them to do it, whether it be the Allies or the Axis. There were heinous acts committed on all sides, right? War isn't pretty. Nobody wins. I said all this yesterday. But in the comments, you guys know I read all of my comments. You guys, I love you guys to death. I really do. But I felt like there was some comments in the comment section on that video that needed a little bit more context or more information given to them than just me typing in a comment. Okay? But anyway, the comment in question was something along the lines of, it took... the Bismarck sank the Hood in a quote-unquote one-on-one or a two-on-two, whatever you want to call it, a fair fight, right? And it took the entire British Navy to take out the Bismarck. And the similar kind of feel comes with Yamato, right? So I have brought up the Wikipedia pages for both the last battle of the Bismarck as well as the last stand of the Yamato. Okay? And I want to go over both ships to kind of give you guys a little bit of an idea of what these ships were actually capable of and why it took so much to take them down. Okay? Now, first of all, battleships. Battleships have one job. Alright? Believe it or not, unlike World of Warships Legends and World of Warships PC, battleships' main job is to project firepower and power across a large distance. Okay? That's their primary task. And in doing so, they are inevitably going to be the center of attention for anybody who wishes to take them out. They are extremely big. They are extremely well armored. They are built with redundancies in place because they know that they are going to take hits. Okay? That is the whole purpose of a battleship. It is a freaking armored tank of the seas, the likes of which will never be seen again. Okay? These behemoths, during their peak, which was during World War II, believe it or not, the peak of battleship performance came during World War II, the likes of which will likely never be seen again. Okay? For various reasons that we may or may not get into this video. But I wanted to go over some things to kind of put things into perspective for you guys. So, the Battle of the Bismarck versus the Hood. First of all, it wasn't just the Bismarck versus the Hood. It was the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen versus the Hood and the Prince of Wales, I believe. I could be wrong, but I think that was the cruiser that was there as well. But anyway, I digress. The battle took place in the North Atlantic, right off the coast of Greenland, I believe, or Iceland, one or the other. I can't remember, but it was very foggy. It was early morning hours, I believe, if I could remember correctly. And this was what the Bismarck was designed for. The Hood, as a battle cruiser, was never designed to be into a situation where it is going to be fighting up close and personal with battleships in particular, right? Like, it's as a battle cruiser, its primary objective is simple: speed and agility with overwhelming firepower. Battle cruisers, by their very nature, are not as well armored as battleships. Okay? Now, I'm not taking anything away from the Hood. In its heyday, the Hood was one of the premier ships of her time. She just was. She was top of the line. But by the time that this fight came around, the Hood had been aging. Okay? And she wasn't aging particularly well. she had been scheduled multiple times for refits, and they kept putting off the refits for the Hood over and over again because they preferred to use the Hood as kind of a projection of power, right? She's a beautiful vessel. She showcases the sleek, unwavering firepower of the British Navy, right? She was a great ship for that. Okay? Fast, able to move around. She's just a good-looking ship, right? And so she showcased and was very good at being the main, not necessarily a flagship, but the main face of the British Navy at the time, despite her age. Okay, but because of these extra like trial or extra like trips around to different ports and stuff that she was taking, her refits had been delayed multiple times. You can go back, see the history. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that when the Bismarck met the Hood, the Bismarck was essentially a brand new, at being only a few years old, top of the line battleship built to fight in the North Atlantic. It was built to be up close and personal. It was built to be overwhelming firepower and take overwhelming firepower in return. That's what it was built for, right? You've got two ships that were built for different purposes. Both very capable vessels, both very capable of sinking the other. But in a peer-to-peer fight like this, you're going to have one or two shots. Usually the first person to land a significant hit will win the fight, because at that point, your ability to fight back is significantly reduced. Between casualties on board, damage control needing to be done to preserve the vessel, as well as, numerous other things, not least of which is the fact that you have different modules that have to be whatever. You guys get what I'm saying, okay? So there's a lot goes into it. It's not just one thing. Now, the unfortunate side of thing is, believe it or not, the Hood was a victim of circumstance. It just was unlucky. As bad as it sounds. Like, it just was unlucky. Now, we still, to this day, do not know whether it was the Bismarck or the Prince Eugen that sank the Hood. There's just no way to really know. The end result doesn't change. The Germans won the fight against the British in that instance. However, what would come next is the British's decision, okay? The British made the decision that the Bismarck, the Tirpitz, the Scharnhorst, the Gneisenau, all of these ships were not going to survive, okay? They could not leave these ships alive, okay? And so the Allies together, it's not just the British in this sense, but the Allies together made plans to get rid of all of these ships. Okay? And given the fact that we had the Bismarck, we knew where the Bismarck was because it had just sank a ship, so it's pretty easy to find it, right? And the Prince of Wales actually stayed close by despite withdrawing. I think it was the Prince of Wales. Somebody's going to dispute me. You guys have more facts than I do. But either way, they stayed close by and radioed the position back to their allies. Okay? The Swordfish and the Swordfish were the planes. The carrier was... I can't remember the carrier. I'm sorry. Somebody's going to yell at me in the comments, but that's fine. This is why we have these discussions. But the carrier was an older carrier, and it had just the Swordfish, the biplanes, the old school like World War I era biplanes, the Swordfish on board, and these Swordfish attacked the Bismarck, despite the Bismarck being a more modern vessel and in theory should be fully capable of protecting itself from such an attack. But it turned out that these Swordfish were actually the perfect thing to attack the Bismarck with, because the Bismarck, while it did have significant AA and the capabilities to defend itself, it was not able to defend itself from the Swordfish, because the Swordfish, being a biplane, flew a lot slower than modern planes at the time, and modern fighters and bombers, okay, flew a lot slower, and they could fly lower, meaning they were able to hug the water on the way in, allowing them to come in underneath the effective AA of the Bismarck. not a single swordfish was shot down. That's not saying none of them were damaged, but none of them were shot down in the attack. However, the swordfish managed to damage and cripple the Bismarck with their attack, despite having multiple duds where the torpedo simply didn't detonate on the hull of the battleship. They did strike at least 2 torpedoes that did detonate and crippled the Bismarck. One actually jammed its rudder, which we all know. I've said it multiple times, somebody getting Bismarcked and they just doing circles, right? That's what happened to the Bismarck, right? But there's one more thing that everybody seems to overlook about that attack. It's not just that they jammed the rudder, okay? The Bismarck was still underway and still could somewhat compensate and maneuver itself towards its goal of getting to Brest, France. It wasn't as effective, but the thing that ultimately secured the inevitable defeat for the Bismarck was the torpedo that hit towards the bow. It opened up the hull, allowing it to be leaking fuel oil. Okay, the fuel oil was used to track down the Bismarck. It left an oil slick behind it on its way, so it was easy to pursue. And the Bismarck kind of got lost. It made a couple of wrong turns at Albuquerque and ended up not getting to Brest, and unfortunately that would ultimately be its demise. But the one thing that people seem to overstate about what took down the Bismarck was it took the entire British Navy to sink the Bismarck, and they still ended up scuttling it. Well, here we're going to put a little bit more context on that particular statement for you guys. So, the last battleship, and this is where I'm going to read directly from Wikipedia for you guys. And again, I'm not saying Wikipedia is the best source of information, okay? But this is an easy way that I can use this as a source for you guys so that you guys get a little bit of context, okay? And you can't yell at me when I read something that's incorrect. The last battle of the German battleship Bismarck took place in the Atlantic Ocean approximately 300 nautical miles west of Brest, France, on the 26th and 27th of May, 1941, between the German battleship Bismarck and naval and air elements of the British Royal Navy. Although it was a decisive action between capital ships, it has no generally accepted name. It was the culmination of Operation Rheinübung. I apologize to the Germans out there. Rheinübung? I apologize. Where the attempt of 2 German ships to disrupt the Atlantic convoys to the United Kingdom failed with the scuttling of the Bismarck. Okay, so if you guys don't know the history, the Germans wanted to get the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen out into the Atlantic so that they can attack merchant vessels from the United States that were supplying Britain and the other allies on a daily basis. So that's what their goal was. They were doing this by going through the North Atlantic, up around Iceland and Greenland, and then they were going to drop down into the Atlantic where they could be at large and be a problem. The British knew this, and hence the Hood was dispatched, because it was in the neighborhood. It was, no pun intended, it was dispatched to go and intercept these ships. It could not be allowed to roam the Atlantic, right? Ultimately, this would be a fatal decision for the Hood due to circumstance, but it would also be a fatal decision for the Germans, because at the end of the day, it was sunk as well. So, the last battle consisted of 4 main phases. The first phase, late 26th of May, consisted of airstrikes by torpedo bombers from the British aircraft carrier Ark Royal. There you go. I knew it was one of the ones that we had in the game. I just couldn't think of which one. I didn't want to say the wrong one. The Ark Royal, which disabled Bismarck's steering gear, jammed her rudders in a turning position, and prevented her escape. And again, they left out the part where it ripped open the front of the hull and let fuel oil leak out, allowing it to be tracked easily. Okay. The second phase was the shadowing and harassment of Bismarck during the night of the 26th and 27th of May by British and Polish destroyers, with no serious damage to any ship. Basically, they kept the crew of the Bismarck on edge, right? They're constantly trying to poke and prod at them, letting them know that they know where they are, right? They can't rest because they know where they're at. They are being trailed. You don't want them to sleep. You don't want them to rest up, because anytime that you're going to have a situation like this, you want to have everybody at their worst possible condition, right? You don't want your enemy well rested. You want to harass them. You want to make sure that they understand that it's as much of a mind game as it is trying to potentially score a hit that could do more damage, right? I don't think they ever wanted to put themselves in a situation where they could damage the battleship. It was more of a mind game, right? Okay. The third phase, on the morning of the 27th of May, was an attack by the British battleships King George V and Rodney. Rodney was a Nelson-class battleship, but it was armed with torpedoes as well. Okay? Something that a lot of people don't realize is that not every battleship isn't armed with torpedoes. Rodney, a Nelson-class battleship, was armed with torpedoes and did use them against the Bismarck. But I digress. The KGV, the Rodney, supported by the heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, sorry for you British folk out there. See, I mispronounce everybody equally. It's just the way I do. I'm sorry. After about 100 minutes of fighting, okay, to put that in perspective, less than 2 hours of fighting, Bismarck was sunk by the combined effects of shell fire, torpedo hits, and deliberate scuttling. Okay? On the British side, Rodney was lightly damaged by near misses and the blast effects of her own guns. This was a common thing that happened quite a bit on battleships specifically because of their large main guns. The overpressure caused when you fire those guns a lot of times will disrupt things like your radar and your firing directors and stuff like that, which is why you have redundancies built in. But it is commonplace to have, in the heat of battle, things get damaged because, whatever. But that's normal on battleships. It happened on Iowa-class battleships. It happened on the Bismarck. It happened on the Hood. It happened pretty much every battleship that has ever been in any sort of situation where it has fired its main guns has damaged itself at one point or another because of the overpressure of the main guns. Anyway, British warships rescued 110 survivors from the Bismarck before being obliged to withdraw because of an apparent U-boat sighting, leaving several hundred men to drown. A U-boat and German weather ship rescued 5 more survivors. In the final phase, the withdrawing British ships were attacked the next day on the 28th of May by aircraft of the Luftwaffe, resulting in the loss of the destroyer HMS Mashana. Not sure which one. So that is the history of the fight with the Bismarck. A lot of people seem to overblow this ship as this thing that just sat there and took everything that the entirety of the British Navy could throw at it. And in reality, it really wasn't. It was a couple of swordfish getting a torpedo hit that crippled it, and then inevitably the King George and the Rodney came in with the 2 heavy cruisers and just turned the ship into Swiss cheese before inevitably the ship was quote-unquote scuttled by the crew to avoid the Bismarck being captured by the British, right? So, with all of that being said, it's not this legendary ship that just took everything that anybody could throw at it and it was fine, right? Like, there were 4 ships shooting at it after it had already been crippled by one attack from multiple torpedo dive bombers, or not dive bombers, but torpedo bombers. Anyway, with all of that being said, let's get to the other side of this argument where everybody talks about the Yamato. Okay? Let's get over here. So, Operation Tengo. This was the operation, it was essentially the last official stand of the Japanese Navy versus the American Navy. Right, we were island hopping and making our way to Okinawa, inevitably just clearing every island of Japanese resistance along the way, forcing the fight back to their homeland. That was our goal. Push all the way back to mainland Japan. On the 1st of January 1945, Yamato, Haruna, and Nagato were transferred to the newly reactivated 1st Battleship Division. Yamato left dry dock 2 days later for Japan's Inland Sea. This reassignment was brief. The 1st Battleship Division was deactivated once again on the 10th of February, and Yamato was allotted to the 1st Carrier Division. On 19th of March, American carrier aircraft from TG-58.1 attacked Kura Harbor. Although 16 warships were hit, Yamato sustained only minor damage from several near misses and from one bomb that struck her bridge. The intervention of a squadron of Kawanishi N1K1 Shiden fighters, named George by the Allies, flown by veteran Japanese fighter instructors, prevented the raid from doing too much damage to the base and assembled ships, while Yamato's ability to maneuver, albeit slowly, in the Nasami Channel benefited her. As the final step before their planned invasion of the Japanese mainland, Allied forces invaded Okinawa on the 1st of April. The Imperial Japanese Navy's response was to organize a mission, codenamed Operation Ten-Go, that would commit much of Japan's remaining surface strength. Yamato and 9 escorts, the cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers, would sail to Okinawa and, in concert with kamikaze and Okinawa-based army units, attack the Allied forces assembled on and around Okinawa. Yamato would then be beached to act as an unsinkable gun emplacement and continue to fight until destroyed. In preparation for the mission, Yamato had taken on a full stock of ammunition on the 29th of March. According to the Japanese plan, the ships were supposed to take aboard only enough fuel for a one-way voyage to Okinawa. But additional fuel amounting to 60% of capacity was issued on the authority of local base commanders. Designated the Surface Special Attack Force, the ships left Tokuyama at 15:20 on the 6th of April. However, the Allies had intercepted and decoded their radio transmissions. Learning the particulars of Operation Ten-Go, further confirmation of Japanese intentions came around 2000 hours. When the Surface Special Attack Force navigating the Bungo Strait was spotted by American submarines, the Threadfin and the Hackleback. Both reported Yamato's position to the main American carrier strike force, but neither could attack because of the speed of the Japanese ships, being in excess of 22 knots, and their extreme zigzagging. So in other words, they were aware that they were being targeted by potential submarines, because things like the fact that we had the Archerfish, the USS Archerfish, a submarine for the United States, single-handedly took down the, not the Musashi, but the other one, Shinano, okay, the other Yamato sister ship. So again, proving that it doesn't take an entire squadron of planes or an entire navy to sink down a ship. The right person in the right place at the right time can absolutely take out these absolute behemoths. Now, obviously, Shinano didn't have the fighting capabilities that the Yamato had because it was turned into a carrier instead. So there's arguments to be made one way or the other, but in essence, they were the same hull. Okay, so keep that in mind as we get further into this story. But I digress. The Allied forces around Okinawa braced for an assault. Admiral Raymond Spruance ordered 6 battleships. If you recognize the name Spruance from like a Spruance class, is it cruiser or destroyer? I think it's a destroyer. I think it's a Spruance class destroyer. I think because if it was cruiser, it'd be named after a city. So yes, it would have to be, since it's a famous admiral, that it would have to be a destroyer. So Spruance class destroyers, for instance. But anyway, that's tale for another time. Dude knows what he's doing, is what I'm saying. If you got a destroyer named after you, you're a significant person, okay, in the Navy of the United States. But anyway. Already engaged in shore bombardment in the sector to prepare for surface action against Yamato. These orders were countermanded in favor of strikes from Admiral Mark Mischer's aircraft carriers. But as a contingency, the battleships, together with 7 cruisers and 21 destroyers, were sent to interdict the Japanese force before it could reach the vulnerable transports and landing craft. Okay, so this is another one of those cases that we talk about. And this just reiterates what I've already said multiple times, and that is simple, that in war, you don't send what is needed to take something out, right? You don't send, okay, we have a battleship over here, I'm going to send my battleship in, they're going to 1v1 each other, and the better battleship wins. If you have the option, you never take that. Instead, you send overwhelming firepower to guarantee the destruction of the enemy vessel or base or whatever you're attacking. Okay? That is your goal. Your goal is simply to kill that thing. whether it's a base, whether it's a plane, whether it's a ship in this case. So you will use everything at your disposal to accomplish that mission, and nothing less. Okay? So keep that in mind as we go forward. Okay. Yamato's crew were at general quarters and ready for anti-aircraft action by dawn on the 7th of April. First Allied aircraft made contact with the Surface Special Attack Force at 0823. 2 flying boats arrived soon thereafter, and for the next 5 hours, Yamato fired Common Type 3 or Beehive shells at Allied seaplanes, but could not prevent them from shadowing the force. Yamato obtained her first radar contact with aircraft at 1000, so 10 a.m. An hour later, American F-6F Hellcat fighters appeared overhead to deal with any Japanese aircraft that might appear. None did. Okay, so all of this is the United States kind of putting the feelers out, and the Allies, the United States and the Allies, putting their feelers out saying, okay, we know where you are. We're going to test the waters, essentially. Make sure that we know what we're up against before we send in the main attack. And the Japanese had to have known at this point what was going on. They knew that they were going to be attacked by everything that could be thrown at it, right? So they were ready for it. At about 12:30, so a couple hours later from the initial contact, 280, okay? I thought I read that wrong too. At about 12:30, 280 bomber and torpedo bomber aircraft arrive over the Japanese force. Asashimo, which had fallen out of formation with engine trouble, was caught and sunk by a detachment of aircraft from USS San Jacinto. The Surface Special Attack Force increased speed to 24 knots. And following standard Japanese anti-aircraft defensive measures, the destroyers began circling Yamato. This is important as well. They're essentially just acting as a screen, as well as extra AA around the ship to try to stave off the attack that is inevitable coming for their capital ship, right? They're acting completely selflessly in that situation, right? You're Mr. Presidenting, for lack of better terms. All right. The first aircraft swooped in to attack at 12:37. Yahagi turned and raced away at 35 knots in an attempt to draw off some of the attackers. It drew off only an insignificant number. Yamato was not hit for 4 minutes, but at 12:41, 2 bombs obliterated 2 of her triple 25mm anti-aircraft mounts and blew a hole in the deck. A third bomb destroyed her radar room and the starboard aft 127mm mount. At 12:45, a single torpedo struck Yamato far forward on her port side, sending shockwaves throughout the ship. These had only minor effects, but no detailed information about this hit survived the battle. At 12:46, another 2 bombs struck the port side, one slightly ahead of the aft 155mm centerline turret, and the other right on top of the gun. These caused a great deal of damage to the turret and its magazines. Only 1 man survived. Shortly afterward, 2 or 3 more torpedoes struck Yamato, 2 impacts on the port side near the engine room, and one on one of the boiler rooms are confirmed. The third is disputed but regarded by Garsky and Doolin as probable, as it explains the flooding reported in Yamato's auxiliary steering room. The attack ended around 12:47. So to put this into perspective, 12:30 they started the attack. 12:47 the attack ended. So this is 17 minutes. All of this just occurred. Keep that in mind. The attack ended around 12:47, leaving the battleship listing 5 to 6 degrees to port from the flooding. Deliberately counter-flooding compartments on the other side of the ship reduced the list to just 1%. Or 1 degree, sorry, not 1%, 1 degree. 1 boiler room had been disabled, slightly reducing Yamato's top speed, and strafing had incapacitated many of the gun crews who manned Yamato's unprotected 25mm anti-aircraft weapons. sharply curtailing their effectiveness. Notice how it didn't say that any of the planes had been shot down, right? Despite having 280 planes coming in to attack you, it does not say that any of the planes were shot down. Okay? The second attack, and also, think of the amount of bomb hits and stuff that were going on, like the amount of chaos that would be from 280 bombers and torpedo bombers coming in to attack a fleet that is circling a capital ship, and this is the only hits that we had, right? Like everything that we saw from the first attack that I just read out, that's the only thing that hit. Okay? That's important for later as well. I want you guys to remember that. The second attack started just before 1300, so 1 p.m. In a coordinated strike, dive bombers flew high overhead to begin their runs while torpedo bombers approached from all directions at just above sea level. Again, think of the chaos that's about to ensue when you have an attack from all directions from torpedo bombers and dive bombers coming in from overhead. The idea that this is all going to happen around the same time, if it's well coordinated, and the idea that somehow that these planes managed to not obliterate one another is crazy to me to even think about, like the crazy coordination that has to go on. And this is well before we had all of modern communication and stuff. Think about that. Like that's what makes this stuff that much more impressive to me personally. But anyway, overwhelmed by the number of targets, the battleship's anti-aircraft guns were ineffective, and the Japanese tried desperate measures to break up the attack. Yamato's main guns were loaded with beehive shells, fused to explode 1 second after firing, a mere 1,000 meters, aka 3,300 feet, from the ship. But these had little effect. 3 out of 4 torpedoes struck the battleship on the port side and 1 to starboard. 3 hits close together on the port side are confirmed. 1 struck a fire room that had already been hit, 1 impacted a different fire room, and the 3rd hit the hull adjacent to a damaged outboard engine room, increasing the water flow into that space and possibly flooding nearby locations. The 4th hit, unconfirmed, may have struck aft of the 3rd. Garsky and Doolan believe that this would explain the rapid flooding reported in that location. The attack left Yamato in a perilous position, listing 15 to 18 degrees to port. Counter-flooding of all remaining starboard void spaces lessened this to 10 degrees, but further correction would have required repairs of flooding the starboard engine and fire rooms. Repairs or flooding the starboard engine and fire rooms. Although the battleship was not yet in danger of sinking, the list meant that the main battery was unable to fire. Her speed was limited to 18 knots. The 3rd and most damaging attack happened around 1340, so 40 minutes after the 2nd attack. At least 4 bombs hit the ship's superstructure and caused heavy casualties among her 25mm anti-aircraft gun crews. Many near misses drove in her outer plating and compromising her defense against torpedoes. So inevitably, these bombs that are missing are still detonating close enough to the hull that it's damaging the hull enough to make, when torpedoes hit, there's less void space, so the torpedoes are able to penetrate deeper into the hull when they do impact. Okay? That's what they're saying here. Most serious were 4 more torpedo impacts. 3 exploded on the port side, increasing water flow into the port inner engine room and flooding yet another fire room and the steering gear room. With the auxiliary steering room already underwater, the ship lost maneuverability and became stuck in a starboard turn. Sound familiar? The 4th torpedo most likely hit the starboard outer engine room, which, along with 3 other rooms on the starboard side, was being counterflooded to reduce the port list. The torpedo strike accelerated the rate of flooding and trapped many crewmen. At 14:02, the order was belatedly given to abandon ship. By this time, Yamato's speed had dropped to 10 knots, and her list was increasing. Fires raged out of control, and alarms on the bridge warned of critical temperatures in the forward main battery magazines. In other words, It's just a matter of time before that powder cooks off and everybody goes with it. Protocol called for flooding the magazines to prevent the explosion, but the pumping stations had been knocked out. At 14:05, Yahagi sank, the victim of 12 bombs and 7 torpedoes. Now, we all know what the Yahagi is, right? We just saw this in my rank stream the other day. So, it's not exactly known for being a tanky big ship, right? It's a tiny little cruiser, old cruiser. And they sank it with, what was it? 12 bombs and 7 torpedoes. Sounds about right. At the same time, a final flight of torpedo bombers attacked Yamato from her starboard side. Her list was such that the torpedoes, set to a depth of 6.1 meters, or 20 feet, struck the bottom of her hull. In other words, underneath what is designated as torpedo protection. And the battleship continued her inexorable roll to port. By 1420, the power went out, and her remaining 25mm anti-aircraft guns began to drop into the sea. 3 minutes later, Yamato capsized. Her main 46cm turrets fell off, and as she rolled, suction was created that drew swimming crewmen back toward the ship. When the roll reached approximately 120 degrees, one of the 2 bow magazines detonated in a tremendous explosion. The resulting mushroom cloud was visible over 6 kilometers high, was seen 160 kilometers away, 99 miles away in Kyushu. Yamato sank rapidly, losing an estimated 3,055 of her 3,332 crew, including Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito. I apologize if I say that wrong, but I think I got it pretty close. And Captain Aruga, both of whom chose to go down with the ship. The few survivors were recovered by 4 surviving destroyers, which withdrew to Japan. From the first attack at 12:37 to the explosion at 14:23, Yamato had been hit by at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. There may have been 2 more torpedo and bomb hits, but that is not confirmed. The experience of the sinking of the ship was described by a Japanese survivor, Yoshida Matsuro, in Sinking Yamato no Saigo, translated to English as the Requiem for Battleship Yamato. Okay, so think about that. From the first attack to the final sinking was 2 hours, just under 2 hours total. Okay, so all of this is to point out one thing, and that is to kind of bring everything into perspective about some of the myths or the bravado that people like to speak about certain ships. And trust me, I'm a battleship guy. You guys know this. I love my battleships. I love ships in general. I love the engineering behind everything. I hold everybody in the utmost respect, even if they were not necessarily on the Allied side, when it comes to like recognizing the bravery and the situations that people were put in that necessarily weren't something that they wanted to be in. Like I can respect that, and I think everybody should be able to respect that, regardless of what side that they may have been on. Now again, there were atrocities in war that were on all sides. There is not a single country that was involved in any of the wars in history that hasn't done despicable things. Okay? Truly despicable things. And it continues to this day as we have more wars raging around the world. But the one thing that remains a constant is that common people, just like you and I, are forced by their governments to go out and get into these beasts of war that we create for one purpose, and that is the destruction of our enemies, right? They don't have a choice. Most of the time, when it comes to these giant wars like World War II, World War I, there's a lot of people that never had a choice. They had to do what they had to do. So keep that in mind whenever you're talking about these ships, whenever you're talking about these battles. A lot of times things get blown up and shown, and I use that term not thinking, okay? A lot of things get taken out of context, taken out of perspective, and I'm just trying to bring some of that perspective, some of that context back in so that you guys can understand that it isn't what you think it was, okay? It's not that it took the entire Navy to sink it. It's not that it took 280 bombers to sink the Yamato, and it didn't survive several days of bombing and all this stuff, right? Like it literally was one major attack that was concentrated, sent all of the stuff that we had, and we already had a contingency. If the original attack of all of the aircraft had failed to sink the Yamato, look at what they had already prepared to send to sink it. It was, let me find it again real quick. There we go. So these orders were countermanded in favor of strikes from Admiral Mark Mischer's aircraft carriers, right? So they had prepared strikes from the aircraft carriers and then a contingency force of the battleships that were already attacking Okinawa, along with 7 cruisers and 21 destroyers, were also sent to attack the Japanese force before it could reach the transports and landing crafts. Okay? So that was the contingency. Obviously, you send your planes in first, if you can, because they are in the least danger, right? You're going to lose less people sending in planes than you will lose sending in battleships, right? So, inevitably, the point that I'm trying to make is that you don't necessarily have a fair fight ever if you can avoid it. Fair fight is for fools, okay? You want to send as much as you possibly can to complete the mission with as few casualties as possible. Because this ain't a video game. It's not about being fair or any of that. It's simply annihilating your enemy as efficiently as possible with as few losses as possible. Okay? So on that bombshell, I hope that you guys have enjoyed this. It's a different style of video. I know inevitably this is not going to be for everybody, but I hope that you guys have enjoyed a little bit of perspective on this, and I hope that this helps clear up some of the misconceptions around some of these infamous ships in history about what it took to sink them and how they were these just unsinkable monstrosities. Because in the end, both of the ships went down very quickly, and it did not take that long. I mean, we saw that the Bismarck went down very quickly, and the Yamato survived a heck of a lot more and ended up going down, just under 2 hours after the initial attack started. So, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' comments. Again, try to keep things respectful. We can all talk to one another because most of us are adults. Talk back and forth, discuss things, and try to have an open mind about different perspectives, because the beauty of our generation, the beauty of being able to have a YouTube channel like this, is that I have people from all over the world that watch our channel, and every one of those people have their own unique perspective on all of these fights that we just talked about, because everybody knows about them, right? I have people that live in Japan that can probably offer their insight on what they were taught in school growing up. We have people in Britain that can offer theirs. We got people in Germany that can offer their. All of the other allies and stuff in the neighborhood, the Dutch, the Australians, everybody that participated in all of these attacks. That's the beauty of it. We're not enemies anymore, right? Most of us are actually allies. That's the crazy part. I know that the world is a crazy place, but my personal favorite thing about the world and my personal favorite thing about my YouTube channel is that interaction from all over the world. I love you guys, and if you like what I'm doing, punch the like button, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, I will see you in the next video.